Domestic violence in Australia. 1 in 3 Australian women will experience some form of family violence in their lifetime. 1 in 5 Australian women will experience some form of sexual abuse. We know that family violence is the leading cause of death, disability and injury to Australian women aged between 16 and 44. But what do we know about queer domestic violence? Today we're going to hopefully shine a light on the dark side of the rainbow. Hi, welcome to the show. I'm Anthony Lekkas, and today we're talking about domestic violence. Matthew and Russ from my other closet, the Cabaret, thanks for chatting with me.
Hey, Anthony.
Nice to be here.
When we talk about domestic violence, I guess the first thing that we think about is the perpetrator's behaviour. You know, what sort of violence is being used. You know, we think about physical abuse, verbal abuse, destroying property, making threats, these kind of things. We're so quick to conjure up images of what domestic violence looks like. But on the other side of domestic violence is those things that you talked about, the enormous strength and the I'm just wondering about the ongoing and daily ways that you would have kept yourself safe and strong and resilient.
You learn what the triggers are. You learn ways to remain safe. One of them with me was to make sure that I always went to bed early and was asleep when he got home. Because if I was asleep, then there was no excuse for any issue to happen. If I was awake and he was in the mood for whatever, then that would escalate into something more. So, they're little things, but they're things that you keep in the back of your mind, and they're part of you. They become part of your routine to keep yourself safe.
And interestingly, I mean, we've had lots of conversations about how these things carry on. Obviously, we're in a relationship now, and there's stuff that hangs on, and one of them, interestingly, is that now Russ almost has this like Pavlovian dog response to if we have a tiff and we have a disagreement about something, tends to be about some area of the show.
You are the director.
Yeah, we do tend to bring it home. Then he just gets droopy-eyed and he's ready to go to sleep because it's kind of become a
survival response.
It's a learnt response. Yeah. It's a learnt response. Right. And if I'm not there, then I'm not there.
Well, can I ask then about impact, post that relationship, and you both doing something incredibly gorgeous about this experience and really offering our community here in Melbourne, and I know it's been to Sydney as well, for us to learn so much about. What does this mean for your relationship in terms of not just working together as colleagues, but how do you decide sort of what goes into the show, what doesn't go into the show?
Look, right from day one, Matt and I both were adamant that if we were going to put the effort into this, then this show had to have integrity. So what goes into the show is anything that gives it integrity. What doesn't go into the show is anything on the peripheral.
And the other tool that we've discovered, we have this amazing dramaturge, Jess Murphy, who it also comes in. Not only is she very skilled and really gets how to communicate, a message and a story, and so she can make those decisions and go. Especially if we're disagreeing on something, Jess is the deciding vote.
She really gets me. I love Jess.
So she can come in and go, "No, Matt, that's not important. Actually, what Russ is saying, that's more important." And we just go, "Okay, cool."
Right.
Or she will say, "Russ, suck it up."
Yeah, that's right. That's really important. You got to say it.
Right. Well, I asked because we're talking about a very personal story, as well as putting a show together, a product, and so I could imagine there would be around the decision-making process around what will go in and what will be left out. Because Matt, being a survivor of family violence is something you also know about as well. It's something that you both know about. I'm just wondering do you connect on that level as well?
I think it was important for us, especially early on in our relationship, to both have a clear understanding of what domestic violence looks and feels like. It allowed us to be able to spot those triggers, know when we in fact were not having conversations with each other. We were having conversations with the ghosts of our past.
Ghosts of relationship past. Yeah.
And learning
Is that the next
how
Cabaret?
that could be. And learning how to acknowledge that, I think was really important. But it also allowed us to, it's not easy to put on an independent theater cabaret, especially to try to convince people that a cabaret about domestic violence is a good idea to come and see, that it's going to be fun, that you're going to enjoy yourself, that's a big ask. So it also helps that we both are extremely passionate about getting this out there, and tenacious. And, it's important to us. I think what's not been done is there's a lot of even in the men's violence against women space, like you said, there's a lot of messaging towards real men don't hit women, stuff that perpetuates heteronormative gender role crap, but also is all about, men have the strength to stop this. And a lot of the messaging is out there saying that who needs to be at the table? The blokes. When actually there's very little going out there going, guess what, women, you're amazing. You are fabulous people that do not deserve this crap. If he tells you that is what you deserve, he's dead wrong, because you're an amazing individual. And I think what we really love about how we've put the show together is that it also speaks directly to victims and says, you're amazing, you're a strong individual, you're fabulous, you don't deserve this. Whatever they're telling you, it's wrong. They're the problem, not you. And I think that's important to us. I
think the other side of it too, that when we first started this, it wasn't a direction I was going in at all. But after us researching and working on this for a while, I actually have an understanding for the other side as well. This is not a one-way street. This is a two-way street, and there are two victims here. The person who is receiving, on the receiving side of the violence, but also the person who's perpetrating this. They're not people to be angry with. They're people that need some understanding, because there are reasons for this. So, everyone involved in this situation starts off as a loser.
Yeah, I think, perpetrators still need to take account.
Yes, they do.
They still need to take responsibility for their actions.
Yes,
We're
they
certainly
do.
not saying that, but, I think that some of the more modern ways of looking at intimate partner violence is that both people are making unhealthy decisions, and both people need to look at those behaviors and decision making, and need assistance to change that behavior, because it's really not all right to be using violence, and a person's not in a good space if they're on the receiving end of that and think that they deserve it, or they can't do any better, or they can't get out of it, or and make the decision to try to get it together. All of that is not good for anybody.
If you've heard something in our conversation today that makes you think perhaps you're using control or abuse in your relationship, you can contact VAC at vac.org.au or QLife.
If in our conversation today it's made you think about anyone maybe a colleague or a friend or a family member even, that this sounds like could be happening in their relationship, please head to qlife.org and speak to a volunteer counsellor about what you might be able to do to help that person. Or you can go to anothercloset.com.au and have a look at the information there for how bystanders can help someone experiencing violence.
If anything in our conversation today has made you realise that maybe you're in a domestic violent relationship, contact Queerspace. They have a specialist LGBTI domestic violence support worker available to talk to you today. Alternatively, call QLife and talk to a volunteer counsellor.
It sounds incredibly complex, there's so much, isn't there, around this situation with you talked about the two people being involved, and I'm just wondering about how do you, because I wonder, because we all have this idea about people who survive family violence, about the sorts of things that they might say about that relationship also, and I guess to hear someone speak about the person perpetrating that violence with some level of compassion is not something that some of us might expect as well. Has that taken perhaps some time to get to that place for you?
Only 15 years.
Right.
Only 15 years for me to get my head around that. And again, the only way that I can do that is because I'm healed. You know, whilst I wasn't, that is a conversation that I could never have had.
So let me ask about the healing and the struggle also. I'm thinking about the show and the songs that are in the show.
Yeah.
It is a cabaret, let's not forget that.
Yes.
There are some very specific songs that you've chosen to be able to get this message across. Can you talk a little bit about what song is why have you chosen those particular songs without giving too much away? We want people to go and see the show.
Look, there's a couple of songs in there that are particularly tongue-in-cheek. There is a moment when I talk about, you know, having these thoughts of leaving this relationship, and then going right back into justifying why I'm not going to, and then going and telling the audience how I'm going to make this relationship work. And the song that we use for that is Stand By Your Man. Now, if you ever, and I'm not going to go through the words here, but, you know, people need to go and listen to that because it's a bloody terrible song.
Right.
Like, you know, it's a terrible song.
Right.
Interestingly, yeah, a lot of the music that we chose shows you how much messaging there is out there in the mainstream discourse, you know, in popular culture, that is really problematic and gross. You know, Stand By Your Man is basically saying to women, no matter what he does, your obligation is to just stand by him because he's a man,
exactly,
and he'll do things that you don't understand, and but you got to stand by him.
Yeah,
and like, it's some gross messaging, and it's not uncommon for that to be, you know, pretty. It's all out there. I think one of the things I would say is that early in the show's development, we looked at the fact that that one of Russell's escape mechanisms and therapy has always been singing, and so we used that in the show to give us a device to be able to justify breaking into song, basically. Right. So early in the show, we set up that that idea that he's using that escape mechanism turns into that it's a fantasy. That actually, if I just keep singing and dancing and I live in this fantasy world, I don't have to acknowledge the reality that I'm in. So it gives us a reason. The audience is brought into that. We're saying, you're part of the fantasy. You're only here seeing this situation because I've made you up to try to cope with this situation. You know, and I think that works really well. We had a great writer who helped us kind of pull out some of those themes. And yeah, it's so then looking for material and looking at songs and how to express different feelings, and you know, we only use pop songs, so it's all covers, and they're all songs that you would recognize. And again, we did that deliberately because we want as much as possible for people to relate to what's going on stage. And if it's a song that you recognize, but you're either going, oh, he tweaked those lyrics only a tiny bit and now suddenly it fits so well, or you're going, whoa, he says the lyrics exactly how they are and I never thought to listen to how, like Luca, for example, is one that Suzanne Vega, that is a beautiful song about experiencing domestic violence, and she's sort of addressing her neighbor, saying, you know, if you hear a noise late at night, you know, don't worry about it. Don't come and ask me questions. I just ran into the door again.
So we were talking not so long ago about the play My Other Closet, and there's a process that happens that the audience don't get to see. So I know you mentioned that you try to take us on this journey very intimately. You take us very closely to your experience, but there's an experience that unfolds for you as you're performing that people won't know about. And I guess that was the fact that you still worry about having this level of attention to the abuse that you experience, because perhaps the perpetrator might notice, or he might come across the play, or even turn up to watch it.
I think very interesting that you bring that one up, because that is a very real thing that people who have experienced violence in relationships deal with. You're very careful not to name people. You've spent such a long time protecting yourself that something like this show just exposes you again to potentially to that person, and who knows what the results of that will be. I mean, again, I'm at the point now where, and I believe very firmly that the person that I was involved with, that was involved in this situation with me, wouldn't even acknowledge that this story was about them. So
it's true. Like if you acknowledge, hey, wait, you're saying all this horrible stuff about me, then you acknowledge that it's about you. And
exactly.
But it's a thing that's really interesting to consider. And I've had conversations with people who've been the victims of sexual assault or intimate partner violence. And it's a funny line of like, am I censoring what I'm saying because I'm still protecting that person, or am I protecting myself? And I think that's a different line for everyone. But it's an interesting conversation. Where are we still as victims being silenced and being told that we don't get to tell our side of the story? And where's the decision that you're actually going, no, I'm not going to give this person any power to come back into my life?
From my perspective, from where I'm at for how much healing I've done, I sit back and go, there is such an important message that needs to get out to people. And if I don't put that message out, who's going to? So it's really personal for me to suck it up, if you like, and do what I've got to do to try and help somebody else that might be in that position get out.
If you've heard something in our conversation today that makes you think perhaps you're using control or abuse in your relationship, you can contact VAC at vac.org.au or QLife.
If in our conversation today it's made you think about anyone you know, maybe a colleague or a friend or a family member even, that this sounds like could be happening in their relationship, please head to qlife.org and speak to a volunteer counsellor about what you might be able to do to help that person. Or you can go to anothercloset.com.au and have a look at the information there for how bystanders can help someone experiencing violence.
If anything in our conversation today has made you realise that maybe you're in a domestic violent relationship, contact Queerspace. They have a specialist LGBTI domestic violence support worker available to talk to you today. Alternatively, call QLife and talk to a volunteer counsellor.
Well, it's an enormous contribution to the community. It's an incredibly enormous a gift, I guess, that you're offering us, not only to learn about domestic violence generally, but also more specifically your experience, because I'm guessing that not all experiences of domestic violence will look the same, but they may all have very similar themes that run across from one relationship to the next when power and control and abuse are prevalent.
Well, you named it. I think that's exactly right. And I think that's an important message for people to understand, that domestic violence doesn't mean physical violence. We tend to think that that's what it means, and that's where our mind goes first. And yes, that was a part of Russell's relationship. It was very physically violent, but not all are. And it just because it doesn't have physical abuse in it doesn't mean that it's not abusive. Emotional abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse, anything that's where one person has all the power and uses it to the detriment of the other is domestic violence. And it can also be outside of intimate partner violence. It doesn't have to be people in a romantic relationship. It can be parent to child. You know, we're very used to this. It's almost a cliche, the idea that a young person comes out and their dad yells at them and their mum cries and, you know, and all of that goes on, or they get kicked out of the house, and we kind of go, oh yeah, that's just a coming out story. But actually that's abuse. You know, that's a young person being told that you're not good enough. You know, who you are is not acceptable in our eyes. You know, and if it, for any other reason, we would never look at that and go, oh yeah, that's just not for me to say. You know, a teacher wouldn't hear a kid talk about their family saying, my dad doesn't want me to have access to hormones because, you know, it won't allow me to transition to be my true gender. You know, if we were hearing someone say, I have cancer and dad won't let me be treated, you know, you'd be going, that's abuse. Let's call in the authorities. You know, it's really quite interesting when you look at how different it becomes when you're talking about LGBTI people in abusive situations.
Right. Well, in a way, it's a call to action. It broadens the accountability. This show does do that. It makes it there's no excuses, I guess. People will see themes in this show that they can now understand as domestic violence, which is information that they'll take with them. Has the show become everything you've wanted it to be? Or where's this going? What's next for the show?
Look, as far as I'm concerned, this show will happen for as long as it takes to make change. And you know, if we can be a catalyst for that type of change through this show, then we're achieving absolutely everything. You know, one day I would like never to have to do this show again, because I would like for this not to be an issue anymore.
We might do a different show that's really light and happy.
Yeah, right.
A total comedy.
Yeah. Well, we'll look forward to more shows from you guys, but we want to thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to us today about such an important issue, a very invisible issue. We're bringing some light to this issue. So thanks again for chatting to us, and good luck with the show.
Thanks, Anthony.
If you've heard something in our conversation today that makes you think perhaps you're using control or abuse in your relationship, you can contact VAC at vac.org.au or QLife.
If in our conversation today it's made you think about anyone you know, maybe a colleague or a friend or a family member even, that this sounds like could be happening in their relationship, please head to qlife.org and speak to a volunteer counsellor about what you might be able to do to help that person. Or you can go to anothercloset.com.au and have a look at the information there for how bystanders can help someone experiencing violence.
If anything in our conversation today has made you realise that maybe you're in a domestic violent relationship, contact Queerspace. They have a specialist LGBTI domestic violence support worker available to talk to you today. Alternatively, call QLife and talk to a volunteer counsellor.